So welcome everybody. I'm very happy to, well, I can't see all of you, but I'm very happy to have all of you here. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Kolsky. I am an associate professor of history at Villanova University, where I also serve as the faculty director of the Albert Lepage Center for History in the Public Interest. I'm very happy to have all of you here. I know many of you have been with us all fall as we have been exploring this theme of decolonizing history. Today is the final event of our fall programming. We've been doing these monthly modules, as many of you know, exploring this overarching theme of decolonizing history, which involves asking a lot of tough questions about the past, asking about how the past is taught and understood, who is remembered, who is forgotten. We've been asking questions about what role history plays in reproducing inequality, in reinforcing ideas about otherness. We've looked at why histories of some people and places are prioritized over others, and we've asked, how do these historical erasures continue to contribute to social injustice today? So in September, we looked at the theme of decolonizing the curriculum. Last month, we looked at decolonizing land. And this month, to mark the 30th anniversary of Black Catholic History Month, we have been having conversations about decolonizing the church. In the spring, we will come back to programming in February. We're giving everybody a break from this tough intellectual work we've been doing. We'll be back in the spring looking at decolonizing empire, decolonizing museums, and we actually have the month of April to be determined. So I welcome your input and your ideas and your suggestions. Today's event is on a Zoom webinar format, which means, just to give you all a little bit of technical insight, you can see the speakers, but the speakers cannot see you. And the normal raised hand function doesn't exist in this format. So what we're going to ask you to do, as you kind of are an active listener, and I'm sure you're going to be inspired by what you hear today, pose questions in the Q&A. You'll find a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We're going to keep an eye on that box. And after the speakers engage in a roundtable conversation, we're very excited to open the floor to your questions. So you can you can just put them in that Q&A, and we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll get to your questions towards the latter portion of today's event. So I am very, very pleased to introduce my colleague, my collaborator on this month's event, Dr. Shannen Dee Williams, who is, as I'm sure all of you know, is a phenomenal scholar, historian, and teacher. She specializes in the history of the African-American experience with research and teaching specializations in women's, religious, and Black freedom movement history. Her phenomenal book titled Subversive Habits, Black Catholic Nuns in the Long African-American Freedom Struggle is forthcoming from Duke University Press. We are all anxiously awaiting its publication. Dr. Williams will serve as the moderator for today's event, and I will pass her the mic to introduce our terrific panel for today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kolsky, and good afternoon and welcome. Once again, my name is Shannen Dee Williams, and I have the great privilege today of introducing our speakers and moderating our conversation entitled Preserving Philadelphia's Black Catholic History and Heritage in the 21st Century, in honor of the 30th anniversary of Black Catholic History Month. And so just to give you an overview of our today's session, again, I'll begin by providing a very brief overview of the history of Black Catholic History Month for those of you who are not aware of its origins in our church. I'll also make a very special announcement about a special development at Villanova as we join in the longstanding initiative to help to institutionalize the teaching and celebration of Black Catholic History Month and Black Catholic history in general, and then introduce our speakers. Then I'm going to pose one question to each of our speakers, allow them to answer that, and then I'm going to open the floor to questions from the audience just to make sure that this conversation is as interactive as possible. And so just very quickly, for those of you who are not aware of the history of Black Catholic History Month, we are in its 30th anniversary, as has been mentioned before. But for those of you who don't know its origins, it begins really in July of 1990 during a meeting of the National Black Catholic Clergy Caucus, which is an organization of African-American priests in the Roman Catholic Church, who were in convention at Fordham University when they decided to vote to designate November to celebrate the long history and rich heritage of Black Catholics in the church. The immediate impetus for the formation of Black Catholic History Month, which was celebrated that November, was the publication of Father Cyprian Davis's landmark study, The History of Black Catholics in the United States. And part of what Father Cyprian Davis helped us to understand was that Black history is Catholic history, that the roots, the African roots of the US Church, of the American Catholic Church, are just as old as the European Church, that the nation itself, if we are looking at the beginnings of the land area that becomes the United States, that story does not begin in Virginia in 1619, but rather a century before in Spanish territories in what is now South Carolina, and most significantly in St. Augustine, Florida. That is the nation's oldest school, and we have to remember that free and enslaved Black Catholics are there from the very beginning. Indeed, the first Christian marriage that takes place in the land area that became the United States is between a free Black Catholic woman from Spain and a Spanish soldier. This is important for us as we continue to move forward and think about the meanings of Black Catholic history in the 21st century. It's also important to remember why they designated November as the month to celebrate the history of Black Catholics in the church. November contains several important dates in Black Catholic history, among them the birth date of St. Augustine, who was the first church doctor from Africa, as well as the feast day of St. Martin de Porres, who was a Dominican lay brother born in Lima, Peru, who became the first person of African descent from the Americas to be canonized in the Roman Catholic Church. It's also important to remember that the National Black Catholic Clergy Caucus was also building upon a long-standing tradition within Black Catholic schools and parishes led by Black nuns who had inaugurated the teaching of Black and Black Catholic history within the church during the Jim Crow era. It's important to remember that the United States is home to the modern world's first Roman Catholic sisterhoods, freely open to free women of African descent, with the Oblate Sisters of Providence in Baltimore, Maryland, founded in 1828, and the Sisters of the Holy Family, founded in 1842 in New Orleans, Louisiana. It will be the members of these historically Black Roman Catholic sisterhoods that inaugurate the teaching of Black and Black Catholic history within their schools and the parishes in which they staffed. Their efforts would be further spread throughout the church by members of the founding members of the National Black Sisters Conference, who were made up not only of Black women who were members of the historically Black sisterhoods, but also Black women who desegregated the nation's historically white and white ethnic sisterhoods. And because we want you to understand how important celebrating Black Catholic history is at an institution like Villanova, itself an Augustinian institution, we are also happy to sort of do an early announcement of a founding or establishment of a new lecture series at Villanova, named in honor of Mother Mary Lange, who was the foundress of the Oblate Sisters of Providence. Beginning next year, we will host an annual Mother Mary Lange Distinguished Lecture in Black Catholic History. And this is an opportunity for us not only to institutionalize the celebration of Black Catholic history at Villanova, but also to honor the African and African-American roots of Villanova and think about the connections that Villanova has to this history. The Oblate Sisters of Providence themselves are the first Black sisters to teach in Philadelphia. They administer one of Philadelphia's earliest schools open to African-American youth, and its first Catholic school open to Black Catholics in Blessed Peter Claver, now St. Peter Claver School, in 1863. These two sisters were among the earliest to come to Philadelphia and to minister to the African-American community. Also, Villanova has a very long and very proud history as one of the nation's earliest Catholic institutions of higher education to open its doors to African-Americans. Among its earliest students were members of the Oblate Sisters of Providence, who come in 1924 and earn many of their degrees from 1924 into the 1960s. And among these earliest students were Philadelphia natives, Sister Teresa Shockley and Sister Rita Barrett, both of whom were educated in Catholic schools in Philadelphia, but subsequently barred from entering the communities of their educators, and they went on to become Oblate Sisters of Providence. And it's an important sort of introduction, I think, for us in our conversation today. If I have learned anything over the past 13 years of studying the history of Black Catholics in the United States and modern Atlantic world, I know that if I need and want to get the story right, I will have to recover and center the lives and experiences of Black women and girls. And so I'm very honored today to introduce our speakers. And what again we'll do, I'll introduce our speakers, ask them a question, and then we'll open up the conversation for questions from the audience. So our first speaker today is Mrs. Adrienne Harris, who is the Executive Director of the Advocates and Descendants of St. Peter Claver Catholic Church, which is a lay organization working to reopen and preserve the history of Philadelphia's Mother Church of Black Catholics. Mrs. Harris is a third-generation member of St. Peter Claver, and she was a third-generation member of St. Peter Claver at the time of its contested closure in 2014. In recent years, Mrs. Harris has donated most of her extensive collection, an archive documenting St. Peter Claver's history, to the Bloxton Collection at Temple University. In 2019, the Advocates and Descendants of St. Peter Claver actually released a documentary film, St. Peter Claver, Mother Church of Black Catholics, Let Us Pray, which was broadcast on YTV 12 on October 21st, 2020 as a part of their Scribe Video Center's Precious Places Community History Project. Mrs. Harris is a lifelong Catholic, a proud graduate of St. Peter Claver Catholic School, St. Maria Goretti High School, and Temple University. Our second speaker is Ms. Jacqueline Wiggins, who is a long-term resident of North Central Philadelphia and a semi-retired educator. Ms. Wiggins has over 40 years of experience as a classroom teacher of English language arts and social studies in the public, parochial, and charter school system, and is currently an adjunct instructor of English for the Community College of Philadelphia. She has been an administrator at 2 historically Black colleges and universities, specifically Florida A&M University and Bennett College in institutional advancement, and she holds degrees from the University of Massachusetts and Mount Holyoke College. In 2014 and 2018, Ms. Wiggins became an elected committee person for the 32nd World 11th Division in North Central Philadelphia, and she is active with various groups committed to preserving the history, and specifically Black history of Philadelphia. As a Black Catholic woman, Ms. Higgins, who is a current member of St. Martin de Porres Parish in North Central Philadelphia, has worked for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and been an active protester of parish closings in the diocese. As well, she was also an early member of the now defunct Black Catholic Lay Caucus, which is also one of the reasons why she remains Catholic to this day. And then finally, our third speaker, Ms. Carolyn Jenkins, is a lifelong Catholic, a retired Catholic educator, and a lifelong parishioner of St. Charles Borromeo Catholic Church in South Philadelphia. She holds a BA in theology from St. Joseph's University and an MA in theology from St. Charles Seminary. She has spent 16 years as a Catholic elementary school teacher, served as the director of religious education at St. Charles Borromeo Parish. She has also served in various capacities in the Office of Catholic Education, in the Office for Black Catholics in the Philadelphia Archdiocese, as well as in the Camden Diocese. She is a member of the Knights of St. Peter Claver Ladies Auxiliary, an associate member of the Sisters of St. Joseph, a board member of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament Center for Evangelization, and she has been a founding director of the St. Peter Claver Center for Evangelization. And so to begin our conversation today, I actually, instead of posing the question specifically to Mrs. Harris, I'm going to pose a follow-up question to her, but she has given us the opportunity to view an 8-minute documentary on the history of St. Peter Claver, which will provide the history of that church, its meanings to the African-American community, its foundational presence in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, and then we'll come back. So I'm just gonna stop sharing for a second and show the video. Sorry, wrong thing.
Black Catholics have been in Philadelphia since the American Revolution. As the numbers of Black Catholics grew, the resentment of the people in the churches also grew, that they wanted the Black people to sit in the back and receive communion last. And the Black Catholics got tired of doing that. So they gathered together and they started their determination to get their own church.
Churches at that time was churches of your race, Irish churches, Italian churches, Polish churches, and Polish didn't go to Italians. They were like, churches that was for just their own nationality.
By the 1880s, the 12th and Lombard neighborhood of the 4th Presbyterian Church had become mostly Black. The congregation put the church up for sale. Black Catholics focused on buying it.
The heiress, Catherine Drexel, saw their determination and she became their mentor. When the Black Catholics got the money to buy the church, Catherine, as their mentor, went to the archdiocese. John Patrick Ryan, the archbishop at that time, told her, "We're not sending white priests to minister to a Black congregation." So Catherine Drexel talked to the Holy Ghost Fathers.
The Holy Ghost Fathers became the Philadelphia, to St. Peter Clavers, because no other priest would go there to be the pastor.
But they wanted their name on the deed. So Catherine Drexel went back to the archdiocese and she told the archbishop, "We have the priest, we have the building, and we want to get the church dedicated." And Patrick John Ryan, the Archbishop of Philadelphia, said, "I'll dedicate the church, but I want my name on the deed too."
As a precaution, the deed contained this protective language that reads, "And the said thereabove described premises are to be used as a church for colored people, parsonage, and school attached thereto. White people, however, being permitted to attend all religious services to receive the sacraments." St. Peter Claver Church was dedicated on January 3rd, 1892.
St. Peter Claver was a full service church. For instance, all of your needs could be met there. In his book, The Philadelphia Negro, that W.B. Du Bois referred to St. Peter Claver and how industrious the people were.
We had schools, the Oblate Sisters too, was there before the Blessed Sacraments. They administered to the Black children for education, where Pennsylvania schools did not allow Blacks to register in them until 1892.
In the 1950s and 60s, the neighborhood around the parish began to change due to gentrification.
My job was to organize the community groups that were in what was known as the South Central urban renewal area. And again, the boundaries are roughly from Lombard Street, Washington Avenue, river to river. The underlying factor in the South Central community was the Crosstown Expressway. The Crosstown Expressway was originally part of the 50-year plan that the city of Philadelphia had. Because urban renewal was Black removal.
What had been a mostly poor Black neighborhood had become a mostly white, pricey neighborhood.
I think it was more about they didn't want the Black children running around the neighborhood. A lot of them complained. And I guess in a couple of the priests, they talked to the neighbors and they didn't talk to the parents and stuff. And I think if we had all worked something out together, I really think the school and the church would be open today.
We had a father, I think his name was Father Andrew. He had us going around taking like a consensus of the neighborhood, because he was trying, I guess, to see that if he can get something going ordered the people to come because he had the ear of somebody in the archdiocese.
All I know, we went to church. And we all sitting here in church, and they said that this is y'all last Sunday. It hurted all of us.
This new word that we heard, suppress.
The suppression meant nobody could be baptized, nobody could be married, and nobody could be buried. What it does, it strangles a church. If you won't die a natural death, we'll strangle the life out of you. So that was the archdiocese method of strangling the life out of St. Peter Claver.
Investigation was done by the National Catholic Reporter, and secrets were revealed. Cardinal Kroll ignored his commission's recommendations. That Father McAndrews had no experience in Black ministry before his first pastorate at St. Peter Claver's, and that McAndrews suggested to the Archdiocese that St. Peter Claver be closed because he did not believe in what he called ethnic parishes.
And I really felt sorry for most of them were older women. Because if they had nowhere else to go and nothing to do, they had the church, they took it from them. But they also took something that was a beautiful thing and minimized what it was really about. In my opinion, for financial reasons, you just take it away because it would be lucrative for somebody else to have it. So instead of supporting it, you drain it.
Parishioners continued to worship until the Holy Ghost Fathers quietly abandoned the parish and the Archdiocese took control. Now that the property was worth lots of money, the Archdiocese wanted to sell it and entered a request to the Philadelphia Orphans Court for the removal of certain words. A group of Black Catholics met to discuss options to preserve the legacy of St. Peter Claver Church.
How dedicated we were to our faith and to our religion, and how strong that we were in getting our own building and making it our church of worship. And we had to sacrifice with no loans, no credit cards. It was 10 cent, 20 cent, 15 cent. And we should know the history on who helped us. But the most important thing for Blacks to know is the Blacks and the people of color that were so dedicated. They wanted a place to worship their God and their faith. And they didn't need the Archdiocese. They did it independent. And we can do that today with that same drive. And we trusted each other. And we became brothers and sisters when it counted.
So thank you so much, Mrs. Harris, for sharing that documentary. Again, it aired recently last month on the local public television. And it's something that we'll be able to share with the audience if we have the opportunity to share the link with you once we post this video as well. And I did actually just want to ask a follow-up question before we move on to our other speakers. Can you give us a sense of what is happening right now with St. Peter Claver, Mother Peter Claver, its status, and what the organization's next steps are, what you would like to see happen with regard to the preservation of the Mother Church of Black Catholics in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia?
Yes, Dr. Williams, we continue to fight for St. Peter Claver because as African Americans, there are so few things that we have because our heritage has been lost due to slavery. But what we do have is this church in Philadelphia that our ancestors established. They purchased it. The archdiocese didn't pay one dime for this church. Black people and their white friends raised the money or contributed the money to have this church. And this church always welcomed everybody, regardless of color. It's really the first integrated church there is. And so many people say, well, my ancestors came and they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. And here you have this church that did this. So we are dedicated to keeping this church, regardless of the archdiocese. So it's been 35 years and the struggle continues as long as it needs to. We have a proposal that was put before the previous archbishop and the current one, telling them that we want St. Peter Claver to remain as a sacred place, not as a parish, but as a shrine church, as a mother church, and as a very special sacred place where people can come together for dialogue, for conflict resolution. And it would be so special because as a mother church, it doesn't need to be a parish. Our needs are so much different this time around than they were more than 100 years ago. Whereas we have people who no longer need a parish, they need a church. And you have people who are single, who are professional, who don't need a school, but these people also need a place to come to church. And also these are people who got all of the blessings that a Catholic education had to give, and they're in a position to maybe help and help younger people and be big brothers and big sisters to them, to lead them and to pay it back in a way, to pay it back and to let the world know that there are Black people in the Catholic Church, and that this church is so much different and so special, more special than any other church. And it's our history, and I will never give it up. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you. When I first came to Villanova 3 years ago, one of the first connections that I made in the Catholic community was Mrs. Harris, who invited me, I think, to Hawthorne Park in South Philadelphia to view this documentary when it was first premiered. And I had the wonderful opportunity of listening to her and many of the members of the Descendants and Advocates of St. Peter Claver talk about the history. And something that just sort of stood out to me so much from that first conversation that I had with Mrs. Harris was that she said, when you erase this church, you erase Black Catholic history. And at that particular premiere, I also had the opportunity to meet Mrs. Jacqueline Wiggins. And I think she and I sort of spoke for about 2 hours that night, just sort of talking about sort of Black Catholic history in Philadelphia. And I learned so much from that conversation. And so I'm gonna transition into my conversation and ask a question to Mrs. Higgins, who is also a Philadelphia native, a lifelong Catholic, who was a current parishioner of North Philadelphia's St. Martin de Porres Catholic Church, which I think is also called The Rock, if I'm not mistaken, it's The Rock. And also a member of the Descendants and Advocates of St. Peter Claver Church. She is a Black laywoman whose home parish, if I recall correctly, was also closed. And then she was also displaced for some time before she found a home at St. Martin de Porres. And I was wondering if you could, from your position as a lifelong, sort of as a long-term educator, both in the public and parochial school system as well as the charter school system, tell us a bit more about your story, what it has meant for you to grow up Black and Catholic in Philadelphia. If you know sort of the background in terms of what prompted the closure of your home parish, its impact on the parishioners, and then ultimately sort of what drew you to St. Martin de Porres and then into this fight that you have also been leading to preserve Black Catholic history and heritage in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. I appreciate it. And thank you, Adrienne. Every time I see a film, you know, it just conjures up everything Catholic in me in terms of what has happened and the work that we do. So I would like to give just a little bit of background about myself. I was born in Portsmouth, Virginia, and by the age of 1 or 2, my mother and my sister Pat, we moved to DC, lived with my aunt and uncle on Benning Road, and that's where we were baptized in DC at Holy Comforter. Well, I should say we were almost baptized because it seems as though during that time, now you're looking at maybe 1952, maybe 53, something like that. My mother was being sent back and forth. There was something called boundaries or something like that at the time. So she would be sent this place and that place. So my mother, being a Southern woman, had no patience with that. And so the story goes, she gripped up, we say gripped up, she grabbed this priest in the collar and said, "You're going to baptize my girls." And we do have documentation that we are actually Catholic. We're baptized. So by 1953 or 54, we were in Philadelphia, and for short periods we lived on Park Avenue, then at my grandmother's, and then on to Raymond Rose in public housing in 1954, because I recall saying to my mother one time, I said, "Mommy, come here, we're rich." And she said, "What?" And I was looking at this beautiful sunset that still appears at 25th and Diamond. It is gorgeous. It's by the railroad track. So my mother enrolled my sister and me at St. Elizabeth's, which the school was at 23rd and Montgomery, and the church was at 23rd and Burke. So it's just, the same track land. We were taught by the Sisters of St. Francis. And when I think about being an educator, I think of this. My kindergarten teacher was Mrs. Maddie Frank. She had taught, I don't know who Miss Frank didn't teach, all right? But she was the kindergarten teacher. And for third grade, there were always a Black teacher. And so my third grade teacher is Miss Phoebe John, and the other teacher is Miss Jackson. And I know there are just a few more Black teachers in the Catholic school system, but I don't think those numbers are what they could indeed be. So I attended St. Eve's we call it St. Eve's affectionately, from grade 8 and then on to John W. Hallahan Catholic Girls High School, where there was a wealth of girls. It's a working class high school. We got into an argument one time with my girlfriend. It's not a working, it is a working class high school, okay? If you come from North Philly, and then the other side of North Philly, which is Kensington, Fort Richmond, and Fishtown, it's a working class school, okay? But we had those that had, everyone did what they had to do to get through. We finished in 1968. So I'm a child of the 50s, the 60s, and a lot of hell raising, pardon the word, okay? What I'd like to do is to talk about, why I remain Catholic. I think, Dr. Williams, that was one of your questions. So I just want to tell this story. In 1969, I was 19 years old. I was still practicing the faith by attending remnants of what we call hootenanny mass, okay, where guitars and drums were being played as if we were at a musical concert. However, when then assistant pastor, Father Wilfred J. Pashley, he's now Monsignor, he introduced a group of Black lay Catholic leaders from Washington, D.C. to the parishioners of St. Eve's. I was stunned. And who were these Black folks talking about Blackness and racism in the church? And who was that Black dude dressed and looking like a priest? That was the thing. Who he be? Well, being a second-year college student in the late 60s only intensified my questioning what Father Pashley thought he was doing. I had not yet made a real connection with the Black Power movement and my participation in my many protests against, well, just about everything about the system. And I certainly had not included the Catholic Church in these protests yet. Church was church, and so far fun. And Black Power was something else, or so I thought. Carol Norris and John Blackwell, Black lay Catholic leaders from Washington, D.C., forever changed that Black Catholic game for me. They spoke forcefully about the church's racism. And the brother dressed and looking like a priest was a seminarian at the time, who later was called Father Thaddeus Posey. He's now deceased. He died a few years ago. He was a member of the Capuchins. He minced no words either about the injustice of racism. While Philadelphia had the revered Oblate Sisters of Providence, I don't recall ever seeing a Black priest while growing up. It was news to me. The experience of seeing and hearing all this heightened my level of awareness of the racism within the church, and in this diocese exponentially. Listening to Carol and John began for me and to others the placements of the necessary seeds of thought and reflection needed to face the facts about the practice of our faith as Christian Catholics. I had the chance to attend the 1970 Black Catholic Conference. Was I excited? Well, I first heard the words Nguzu Saba. Nguzu Saba, the 7 principles. Ron Karinga brought those to life. We celebrate that for Kwanzaa. And seeing a host of Black religious sisters from different orders, all these different, habits, and I was like, what is going on? Was eye-opening. And I had just read or was going to read, I forget when his book came out, maybe in 70, 71. Father Lawrence Lucas. Father Lucas passed away this past May, I think it was. His book was titled Black Priests, White Church. And the making of a Black Catholic revolutionary for me was definitely in the making. I also had the chance to teach in Father Lucas's school. Now, my goodness, he wanted everything taught by way of Black history and culture. We didn't have holidays such as, say, Columbus Day or President's Day. We celebrated Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, who was the buddy of his. I'm telling you, I was like in Black heaven, all right, at that school. I loved it. I also keep in contact with one of the families even to this day, and that was from 73 to 75. Also, this experience led me and others to connect with one another and organize our very own Black Lay Catholic Caucus in Philadelphia under the leadership of the late Charles Hammock. And I just want to sort of add that I had a chance to work for the diocese 1 year for quarter. It's called the Committee on Research and Development of the Urban Ministry. And we led Black Catholic Masses. The first one was at Jesu, over which Bishop Harold Perry presided. This also led to religious like Sister Mary Roger Thibodeau and Sister Patricia Chappelle emerging as speakers to Catholic audiences. So for me, it's been, you know, a real experience. In terms of the closure of my parish closed in 1993, but it wasn't just St. E's. Unbeknownst to us, the priest scandal had to have played a part in this church closures of St. Elizabeth, Most Precious Blood, where there's so many people in that church you couldn't even get in, all right? Jesu, St. Veronica, St. Edward, and one white parish in Chester, as I recall. Why these parishes? Why the Black and Spanish parishes? Racism. No respect for Black people, Latin people, some white folks. We protested. Did we protest? We most certainly did. As a matter of fact, of the group that was large initially, that really dwindled to about 5 or 6 of us, 2 white protesters, Frank Mamone and a young man named Richard, were arrested. Even the judge was upset. He just really dismissed the case, you know, this kind of thing. The planning process for the closure of those parishes was a sham. Why? Because the diocese, as far as I could surmise, had already known what it was going to do. They knew what the problem was, all right, they knew this. And even a white reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Ralph Cipriano, lost his job because of what he was elevating. He talked about a house in Ventnor, New Jersey. I tell you, it was quite a bit. Now, what drew me to St. Martin de Porres? Well, after the closures, I did very little attending of church. I tried to work with CYO as I'd done at my home parish, but that waned. And for myself, not going to Mass or going to St. John's, that's where it was sort of different, but I decided to do that. I would go to Mass at St. John's near Wanamaker's in downtown Philadelphia, which is now
Macy's.
It's called the Macy's now. Many parishioners went to either other Catholic churches or left the Catholic Church, period. They went to mosque or they just knew church anymore. Others, majority, I would say a good collection of people went to St. Columba's, which has now been changed to St. Martin de Porres. And it was Dr. Jermaine Edwards of St. Columba's, who we were at a Black Panther meeting at the Church of the Advocate, Episcopalian Church. She told me, we're getting a Black priest. I returned. That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Wiggins. And my apologies. I think when we were first talking, I was thinking you were telling me you were a Philadelphia native, and then it sort of came to me that you were from Washington, D.C., and you knew the Oblates because they had been stationed at Holy Comforter. So thank you so much for that correction. I am going to introduce and ask a question to our final speaker, and then I'm going to open up our conversation to the audience. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and continue submitting them to our Q&A function. Ms. Jenkins, so my question to you, as a lifelong member of St. Charles Borromeo, which is a 155-year-old Black Catholic parish in South Philadelphia, I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about your experiences and what it meant for you to grow up Black and Catholic in Philadelphia, and also speak about sort of the current situation at St. Charles Borromeo. For those of you who are not aware, if you were watching the news this summer, Ms. Jenkins and several members of the parishioners at St. Charles Borromeo made headlines and the local sort of TV news as a result of 3 separate demonstrations that were held to protest what has been described as an attempt to ostracize and segregate the parish's longstanding Black members. And so I wonder if you can just help us very quickly walk us through the history of St. Charles Borromeo as what you call the center of Catholic social life in South Philadelphia and as a safe haven of Black Catholics in that neighborhood, and then give the audience just really an overview or an introduction to what happened this summer and where and what the status of Black Catholics in the parish is today.
Thank you, Dr. Shannen. And I have to tell you that, you know, it's going to be very hard for me to do that in a long time, in such a short time. I'm also a product of St. Peter Claver, as my grandfather was one of the people who originally attended St. Peter Claver when it first started. He was, and was also taught by St. Catherine Drexel. When the parishes started when they were welcomed by other parishes in the neighborhoods, then my grandfather, who lived in South Philadelphia, started to attend St. Charles Borromeo Church in South Philadelphia. And of course, his children were then raised up as Catholics and brought up at St. Charles Borromeo also, although I'm told that many of the things that they did as far as the sacraments and things still had to be done at St. Peter Claver. But to go back to where we are now, it is almost unbelievable to believe that the things that are happening then are still happening now, as is obvious in the parish of St. Charles Borromeo. St. Charles Borromeo has been a Black Catholic parish for 70 years. It is it has all kinds of social and spiritual attributes that many people from all over the diocese can tell you about. I mean, it was the social haven for the South Philadelphia youth and adults at that time. Right now, we are experiencing an unbelievable, obvious racism. 6 years ago, St. Charles, a minister was sent to St. Charles Borromeo. His name was Father Esteban Graniac, and with him came a group. He belongs to a group called the Neo-Catechumens. They immediately began to take over this Black parish, all Black parish. Immediately, meaning that they took over, he immediately fired all of the Black personnel that was there at St. Charles, and he began to separate the people. He took over so obviously as in the buildings. There were 3 buildings that still belong to St. Charles that were used for many kinds of activities, both religious and social. He took those buildings over. 1 building now is sold and is condominiums as we speak. His attitude even was racist, as we would, all of us who are African-American descent or Black can tell you what racism is. We do know what racism is. It is, listening to the people talk now, it's kind of unbelievable how I lived and can still tell you about a lot of this racism that has been in the church and is still going on. When racism is a sin, as we all know, it is the marginalization and or oppression of color. And this is most obvious at St. Charles Borromeo with the administration of Father Graniac. He came in immediately and fired all the Black people and held any kind of paid position in the parish on the pretense that he could not continue to pay them a salary when asked. We had active parish life in the parish, such as the parish council, etc. All those things were immediately discontinued. He immediately began to restructure the buildings of the church to make them more available to the Neo-Catechumens, the group in which he belonged. That also caused a lot of separatism, obviously, which is very obvious, that it can be seen just by going and looking at what has happened at St. Charles Borromeo. All the Black Black crosses and things that we use for our African American religious services were taken away. He, in the bulletins, he said he had 5 masses, although only 2 of them were advertised. So the other 3 were obviously for the neo-catechumens. Now, I have to tell you that neo-catechumens mostly are not Black. So that's why we're calling it, that's why we know it is racism. It is systematic racism because originally that was the intent when he came to take over the parish, and it is still going on. We have been protesting for 6 years. We tried to go through the proper channels. We went to the dean of South Philadelphia. We went to the diocese. We went to and said, this is what's happening. All you have to do is come and look and see. Racism is evident where we are. And of course, all of this was dismissed. One of the reasons that they said they dismissed it was that they were giving this person another chance to be more amicable to the people, and that, you know, he was, and to be more amicable and sensitive to the needs of the people. This did not happen. This has not happened. In our recent, which even a month ago, letter to the Archbishop is exactly what this new Archbishop said also. We're going to give him another chance. I mean, we're talking about 6 years here, and they say they're going to give him another chance. The other chance for him to be more amenable to the people, and to give him another chance to, you know, try to meet with the people, but which is not, definitely not what his intention. What we are so upset about is that the Archdiocese, who claim to be anti-racist, are still allowing this to go on, They hopefully now, we have sent a letter to the bishops that met this week in Washington, and hopefully our case is one of the ones that they will be looking at. What is so strange about that is that Archbishop Perez is actually the chairperson of that whole Committee on Cultural Race and Racism. So hopefully he will see what our parish is going through, or either acknowledge what it is that's going to. You know, you really can't do anything until you acknowledge what is actually happening there. So that's what we are hoping for now. He's asking the people to be more charitable, asking the people of St. Charles to be more charitable to these people. There are many things that has happened, such as, that I could go on for forever talking about, but such as the language that he's used, even at Mass. The churches have been completely changed to meet the neo-catechumenate way of worship. At one time, they were worshiping in all 3 buildings, which we were not allowed to use, meaning the St. Charles Borromeo parishioners who have been in there working all the time. He had 3 separate worship sites for the neo-catechumens. As of now, he brings in bus loads of people from out of town for the different worship services, and there's not a way that, and there's no place for the St. Charles Borromeo parishioners to actually attend Mass. They come in, they don't wear masks, they sleep overnight, which definitely does not house social distancing. So we don't know how any of that can happen. At our last Sunday Mass, there were 2 people from St. Charles in attendance because they're afraid to attend because of the situation that's there now. And maybe 16 or 17 catechumens. The pandemic worked in his favor, because when the churches finally opened back up, he had completely changed the structure of our church, completely changed it. There's no communication with the people in any of these things that were done. I mean, completely changes, as if the balconies was taken out. There was, the choir loft was changed. The whole sanctuary was completely different, even though it had just been done maybe 10 years ago, which is new for a church. But it was completely changed. There were locks on the building so that you could not use the main sanctuary, which I thought the Archdiocese said that we were supposed to do. But there were locks on the building. It is just an unbelievable condition, and it is obvious. There is no doubt about what it is and how it's being done or what the purpose is. There's no doubt about it. That's, I mean, anybody could see it, you know. And as you said, newspapers and things have tried to cover our situation, and one of the things that they say that, you know, well, we've been said, well, you know, you're Black and you're Catholic, why don't you just go somewhere else? However, that is our church. We have been loyal to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia for all these years. We have been, Catholicism does not belong to the white people. It belongs to our Black sisters and brothers and our grandparents and so forth, ever since, and it goes back all the way to scripture with the Ethiopian eunuch. So we are supposed to be where we are. We will remain where we are. We will continue to protest as long as these situations happen. We have been loyal members of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, and we feel as though that should be recognized, and they should come to, they shouldn't really come to our aid. They should just give us what is really ours to do.
Thank you so much for these three passionate presentations on why, you know, the story of Black Catholic Philadelphia matters, but also why it is so critical for people on the ground, members of the laity, to sort of fight for this history in the face of erasure, in the face of parish closures. I know we just have a few more minutes, and I'm just going to jump right to some questions because we've been getting questions throughout the conversation today. And one of sort of a question that I would like to sort of pose to all the class, well, not even a question, but a comment that has been posed from historians who have, and those who are active in preservation and history in Philadelphia. One, they thank you for this wonderful panel. There are many people who have been following sort of the stories of St. Peter Claver, of St. Charles Borromeo, and the closures of Black Catholic parishes in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And they are curious to know if there are any ways that specifically that preservationists in Philadelphia can support your efforts. What can people do? How can they sort of become involved, whether it is showing up at meetings, helping to write local register nominations, putting your voices in histories, your voices in this history in the venues for preservation societies? What do you think, and what do you need at this particular moment? What would best support your efforts?
Can I go first with that? I would love to answer that question. First of all, we have been preserving our history, but what we need to do, since St. Peter Claver is the mother church of Black Catholics, it's the roots of Black Catholicism in this Archdiocese of Philadelphia. If it goes away, then the roots are destroyed, and there are no roots, because the history of Black Catholics is not taught anywhere. But at St. Peter Claver, we have begun to gather that. And St. Peter Claver needs to be safe. It needs to be not under threat of being sold by the Archdiocese or anyone else. We do not want our church sold. And we have a beautiful school that's alongside of it that could be turned into a center for dialogue and conflict resolution. And I think Villanova University would be the perfect partner for St. Peter Claver, because even if we wanted to use the school, to use the church in South Philadelphia, you need to be able to park somewhere. St. Peter Claver has a schoolyard that's adjacent to the school, and people going to the church would be able to park in the schoolyard. And the partnership between St. Peter Claver and Villanova would be a win-win situation, because St. Peter Claver, as a center for dialogue, young white people who do not live in Philadelphia probably have never spoken to Black Catholics, not as a big lecture, but a one-on-one conversation in a peaceful place where you can park right next door and you can dialogue one-on-one. You talk and listen. Each take turns. I listen to you, you listen to me, and we learn from each other. And we'll be able to all work together for our common good, which is helping young Catholic people learn to trust each other and to work together, and also learn about Black Catholic heritage that has never, never, ever been taught in Philadelphia. For instance, most people don't even know that many Black people are cradle Catholics. Everybody is not a convert. Many of us were, our parents and our grandparents were Catholic before they came to Philadelphia. And to explore those kinds of histories and the powerful, wonderful gifts that Black people give to the Catholic Church and bring to it, and add those so that all of us together, Black, brown, whatever sex you are, St. Peter Claver never welcomed everybody. And I think Villanova University is the only place that has the ability to take over the St. Peter Claver property, make it safe from threat of sale by the Archdiocese, to be able to open up the church and have it not compete with parishes, as the mother church maybe have vespers, and we call it vespers and victuals, where you could come to services in the afternoon, get something to eat, and dialogue in a safe, comfortable place. So that's my prayer, and that's my wish.
Thank you. Ms. Wiggins?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and thank you, Adrienne, for that. But I think a couple things. Number one, there are 53 people I see as participants, and if we could have half that number work with Adrienne, work with Carolyn for the preservation of both. You understand? When I think about what happened in my parish, and I think about and having been working with Adrienne some, that my parish and not Jesus, Jesuits took over Jesus, but Most Precious Blood, St. Veronica, St. Edwards, and any of the others, were those parishes closed properly? All right. It seems that there's a protocol for closing these parishes, and I'm curious to find out. And if there's a lawsuit to be done, we need to entertain it. When we're talking about the preservation, I'm going to be serving on the panel at the state level for historic markers. And there's this question already about those things that are religious. Well, if the state's not going to do it, then I think we have to do it. And we need to put pressure on this diocese, because what's happening at St. Peter Claver and St. Charles Borromeo is an absolute disgrace. It's the only way I can describe it. And whatever it is that you need, we need to get some folks riled up enough to say, we cannot have this. This is 2020. 400 years of this nonsense is just unconscionable. So some people of that number, you want to join, you join. You get the information from Dr. Williams as to who we are, where we are. Thank you.
Can I just jump in a minute and say, St. Peter Claver has been on the battlefield since 1985, right? Yeah. It's we have to fight it a different way. So that's why I'm saying, rather than bicker with the Archdiocese, to have St. Peter Claver under the auspices of Villanova University as a center for dialogue and conflict resolution. And we have our afternoon services because we're a mother church, not competing with the parishes. It's a new time we're in a new phase. We want to go in a different direction.
Ms. Jenkins?
Yes, and if we've just heard what everyone has to say from St. Peter Claver to St. Charles, you will see what is happening to our Black Catholic churches now. So if we're talking about preserving them, you can actually see what is happening. In the 60s, everybody was trying, the Black churches were flourishing in the 70s. Look at what's happening now. It's like going around in a circle. So if you want to start to preserve it, then start preserving what we have now, trying to keep it and work at the preservation of our history, what is here.
Thank you. Can I just add something very quick? And I want to say this to Carolyn. St. Charles, during my time, they used to have a midnight mass, and it was wonderful because this is the place, if you wanted to know where the next party was, you would go to midnight mass because Father John said you would have, you would take care of your Sunday obligation.
Tickets.
And a lot of musicians, and you would figure out, hey, where's the party? And you go to
to
the party. So St. Charles was famous for its social life.
And can I just say something real fast? Even as we started to evolve, I should say, there was a history course, Black Catholic history course that we fought for, we had at the seminary. All those things are not there anymore. So you can see what is happening now. We're going right around back to where we were in this whole, unfortunately, racist society.
but just remember, if you kill the roots, nothing will grow.
That's why we have to work at it. That's right.
Shows there's no more roots, and the Black Catholic churches are being picked off one by one by one by
That's
one,
right.
and there's no unity. So
That's right. That's right. Stay unified is one of the most important things.
Right.
To stay unified.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. You have really gifted us. You've gifted Villanova University, the Lepage Center, with really sort of a beautiful, sort of beautifully narrated sort of story of Black Catholic Philadelphia, both sort of the faithfulness, but also the struggles and the enduring struggles against discrimination and wherever it is coming from. We are going to share this recording with our audience. We will also post the documentary on St. Peter Claver, and we're going to make this information, all of the coverage of what is happening at each of these parishes, available to our listeners and for those who are going to sort of receive the video recording. So I do know we're right at we're a little over past 1:30. I am going to unfortunately have to end us for today, but I do want to thank you all for helping us to celebrate Black Catholic History Month, for helping us to understand that Black history is and always has been Catholic history, and to help us to understand why we must know and preserve the history of Black Catholics in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. We will certainly be in touch. We will be following you and trying our best to support you in any way. And I just want to thank you again, really, for the opportunity.
And I want to thank you and say, go Wildcats.
Thank you so much.